So we talked about earlier from this section about how you graph certain things given two variables. Now we're going to talk about how you graph things if you only have one variable. And this is the idea of a horizontal or a vertical line. And there are two types of lines that you can deal with, a horizontal or a vertical line. And what I'm going to talk about first is this graph when you just have the y variable. So what you see here is this example where you have y plus 4 equals 0. So I'm going to just solve this right now for y, and I'm going to subtract 4 to the other side, and I'm going to get the equation y equals a negative 4. Now, we don't have two variables in this case, so I'm just going to make a chart just so we can see something here. If we plug in any value we choose, there isn't any x to choose, so I'm just going to pick a couple random values for x. It doesn't matter which ones we choose. I can pick 0, 1, and 2. It doesn't matter which ones we choose because it always tells us what y is equal to. It tells us y is equal to a negative 4. So whatever x value I pick, y is always equal to negative 4. So I have 0, negative 4, 1, negative 4, 2, negative 4, and the pattern continues on and on for any x value that I pick. So what this is, it is a horizontal line going through the y-axis at that point. And what I mean is that this is the horizontal line, and this horizontal line, it goes through the y-axis at negative 4. So it goes through the y-axis at negative 4. So when you're thinking of this, this is horizontal. This line y equals whatever. And whatever number you have tells us where in the axis that it intercepts at. Okay? So when you see this line x equals, it's the exact opposite. When you have this line x equals something, this is the example of a vertical line. And it doesn't matter what value for y we pick because it always tells us that x is equal to negative 4. Now, they're not always going to be negative 4, but in this case, there's always going to be negative 4 no matter what y value you pick. So I can pick 0, I can pick 1, I can pick 2. This is an example of a vertical line. So it's going to be a vertical line going through the x-axis at negative 4. So there is my line, and I'm just going to connect it, and there is my line here, and it goes through the x-axis at negative 4. So if there's only one variable, that variable tells you what axis it goes through, and it tells you what point at the axis it goes through at. Okay? Now, there's another way that you can graph things, and you're going to probably find that this is probably the most easiest way when given a line in a certain form. Now, when we talk about intercepts, we're talking about where they hit the axes at certain points. So when we're talking about a specific intercept, we're talking about a line and where this line hits a specific axis. So when you have any line, we're talking about where it hits the x-axis and where it hits the y-axis. And when you're talking about where it hits the x or the y-axis, there's always specific properties about any intercept. Okay? At any x-intercept that you pick, it doesn't matter where it is and it doesn't matter which line it is. As long as you have an x-intercept, it's going to be somewhere on the x-axis. Now, if you have a point that's on the x-axis, it's not going up or down any. It can be here, it can be here, it can be here. It's not moving up or down any. So that means that the y-coordinate, since it's not moving up or down any, is automatically 0. Okay? So the y-coordinate is automatically 0. So if you're going to find the x-intercept of something, you're automatically going to make the y-coordinate of it 0. So I'm going to plug that in to this equation. So I'm going to have 3x plus 4 times 0 equals a negative 12. So this cancels out. So I'm left with 3x equals a negative 12 divide by 3, and I get x equals a negative 4. So my x-intercept is at the point negative 4, comma 0. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing for the y-intercept. Now the y-intercept has the exact opposite property. The y-intercept is where it hits the y-axis, so it's not moving left or right any. So every y-intercept for any line you pick has the exact same property that x is equal to 0. It doesn't matter which y-intercept you pick for any line. X is always going to equal 0. So I'm going to plug in 0 into this equation. So I'm going to get 3 times 0 plus 4y equals a negative 12. So this cancels out, so I'm left with 4y equals a negative 12. Divide by 4, and I get y is equal to a negative 3. So my y-intercept is 0, comma, negative 3. You're going to find that this is probably going to be very helpful to graph certain things. And the next example that I give you has this using a graphing technique for intercepts. So you can see here it says to graph using the x and y intercepts. So like I mentioned in the previous video, you need 2 points to graph something. So I'm going to graph the x and the y intercept. And if you graph those two things, you're going to be left with 2 points, and you can graph the line through them. So I'm going to let y equal 0 for the x-intercept. So I'm left with 4x minus 0 equals 4, or just 4x equals 4. And if I divide by 4, I'm left with x equals 1. So my x-intercept is at the point 1, comma 0. So I'm going to put a dot there. My y-intercept is where x is equal to 0. So I'm going to sub in 0 for x. So I'm going to plug in 0. So I'm going to get 4 times 0 minus y equals 4. I'm left with negative y equals 4. Divide by a negative 1. I get y is equal to a negative 4. So my y-intercept is at 0, comma negative 4. So I'm going to plug that point in. I have 2 points on a line. So if you have 2 points, you can connect them. And there is my line. And there is another way that you can graph things using the intercept method. In class, we will talk a little bit more about how you necessarily deal with things if you don't have 2 points.